Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PASS Marathon, the new world of data privacy. We are excited you could join us today for the Sarangi session on how GDPR compliant are you, centralized and decentralized do. This PASS Marathon featured back-to-back live webinars delivered by expert speakers from the PASS community. The session will be recorded and posted online after the event. You will receive an email letting you know when the recordings become available. My name is Ray Simayev, and I'm a database consultant, and I'm a volunteer on behalf of the PASS to moderate this session. And I have a few introductory slides before I hand over the reins to Jess. If you require technical assistance, please type your request into the question pane located on the right side of your screen, and someone will assist you. This question pane is also where you may ask any questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to enter your questions at any time, and once we get to the QA portion of the session, I'll read your questions out loud to Jess. You are able to zoom in on the presentation content by using the zoom button located on the top of the presentation window. Please note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session, which will pop up after this session ends in your web browser. And your feedback is really important to us for future events, so please take a moment to complete this. This PASS Marathon session is presented by Jess Sarangi. Jess has had nearly a decade of experience in leading data governance, master data, and data quality. She also has extensive experience with developing effective business roadmaps and business models across e-commerce, B2B, B2B2C, with a major focus on effectively evaluating and aligning business intelligence analytics and data warehousing with the appropriate KPIs. And without further ado, here's Jess with how GDPR compliant are you, centralized and decentralized duo. Jess?
Alrighty, hello everyone. Let me share my screen so that you know who I am. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, anywhere you're in the world. Thank you so much, PASS, as well as Redgate, for giving me this opportunity to talk about GDPR compliance and present the demonstrations on tools like SSIS and SSIS and talk about centralized and decentralized part of the GDPR compliance that comes into picture. That being said, thank you, Rise, for giving me the opportunity to talk about myself without giving a long introduction. You already did that part. If only my slide can get to the next one. Perfect. So we have had a lot of gaga about GDPR compliance when it comes to picture May 2018 last year. And a lot of us as DBAs or as developers or as project managers, when we went to the EU website to look at the really long list of GDPR rules that we have, we kind of lost track in what way we can implement the rules in the tools that we are using. Because the topic is such at a broader level, it is tough for us to take each and every article that the whole EU website has and to implement it various tools that we have. That being said, I am coming from master data management domain, and the tools that I've been using is master data services, data quality services, even if that product is completely dead, or SQL Server per se, and then SSIS packages, SSRS packages, and then talking about what other UI-based tools that I have that we can leverage in our management and executive team that can call us as a GDPR compliant company, right? And before this GDPR came into picture, we have had other SOC compliance companies. And you know, if you're a risk analyst, you know what I'm talking about. You go to companies, you go to big consulting firms and get their certifications done for security and compliance and whatnot. But when GDPR released all of the articles, it was very tough to locate and actually position yourself in the whole world of security. Prior to this, all we know was HTTPS or SSL layer security implementation. And we had a lot of feature in SQL Server, but we never talked about that in a security on a broader level way. And after that, we know that California is going to release its own CCPA that is coming into life next year. And we're trying to notify ourselves as a citizen of United States in what way are we going to be our own security compliant person, or are we going to be compliant with another rules set that whole another country has been setting up. So that being said, in this demonstrations, I will be covering article number 25, 30, 32, 35, and then talk about 24 a little bit, but my demonstrations will be done upon article number 25 and 32, particularly about controlling access to data and encryption of the data. And so let's talk about these articles real quick. And before I do that, I'll be ending the presentation talking about Compliance Manager and Security and Compliance Center, and a little bit of demonstrations on those particular two tools and what they can give us in the upcoming releases. And please remember that these tools are not completely live. Compliance Manager is still planning on releasing another features in this year. So that being said, I could barely find any companies which are actually using these particular tools. But I'm very hopeful about the upcoming years because of the actual releases that are coming up, that we can be heavily compliant in terms of security and data protection and data categorization and things like that. So a real overview of Article 25, what does it talk about? Under this article, they mentioned that you're responsible for controlling who has access to your personal data and how the data is processed, stored, as well as accessed in the future. This also requires you to implement various safeguards to manage the stored data. So the feature that we will be talking about is dynamic data masking, and how can you use various functions under dynamic data masking and have it implemented on your email address, on your specific columns in your database and things like that. Article 30 talks about recording of the processing activities. So anywhere the CRUD operation happened, create, read, update, delete operations happened, here you would have to provide a proper audit of all the records and the personal data that is processed in your application. So one of the features that SQL Server provides, which is in compliant with Article 30, would be SQL Server audit process. But I'll not be covering that in my demo today. Article 32 requires that your data is completely encrypted. And kind of, if you're hearing me out really well, that Article 25 and 32 is kind of overlapping. The only difference between that is Article 25 is talking about controlling the access. It does have an encryption label associated with that, which is kind of like dynamic data masking that you're doing. But Article 32 is actually the crux of the encryption. So here you would be talking about what is the robust and transparent process to store the data and test the security for that. So there are many features for this particular article in SQL Server that are compliant with this, and a couple of them could be row label security, transparent data encryption, always on, always encrypted, transport layer security, and our good old days of SSL implementation. And then article number 35. Here you will be responsible for documenting all of your data that you have and implementing organization's requirement on what is your process of analyzing the data, their risk, and document it. So basically, if you're a business system analyst, or if you're a little bit functional person rather than a DBA or a developer, Article 35 is completely your era, where you would have to take all the responsibility to prove that your company is GDPR compliant. And that being said, the features that comes with SQL Server is actually the temporal tables, and then SQL Server audit process. And as a BSA, there are other manual or human-oriented processes that you can implement where you can show your documentation and that your organization is SOC compliant as well as GDPR compliant and other 13 compliance processes that we have. That being said, compliance manager, security, and compliance center, I would say they are kind of falling under Article 35, and just because of the reason that they capture the processes, they capture the documentation that is verified either by yourself or by a third party. And compliance manager is a tool after verification of your documentation of your company's processes, auditing processes, and the log files that you would upload. The tool itself will assign you a certain number of points, and upon looking at that points, or it's just like passing an examination, that you would clarify or get the certification that you're GDPR compliant, that you can show it to your higher executives or anytime your company is hit by a big auditing firms and things like that. So if you have done enough research, or if you have ever been interested in GDPR compliant and have Googled yourself into this topic, you might have read about a couple of videos that Microsoft has its on MSDN website. They're talking about in how many ways the compliance manager can be helpful. And before I talk about the descriptive part of it, let me tell you a little difference between compliance manager and compliance center. Compliance center can be accessed at protection.office.com, and compliance manager can be accessed at the portal link. So they have a service portal. That's where you can access the compliance manager. But the real question was, what happens in those two tools, because Microsoft has been selling that these two tools are majorly designed during the time GDPR went live. And so what all, like if you would have to give a broader label explanation to a person who barely knows about GDPR, what do you want to tell to your audience? And taking that in mind, I created these 3 bullet points, which is you assess and you manage your compliance risk. What are the risks coming up to you? I can give my personal example. I work for a legal services company, and we claim to provide a solution for data breach cases, class action cases, mass tort cases, and things like that. So when you're providing things which are very concerned to your personal data or PII data, and let's say your own company, my own company is going under a data breach case, then I'm like basically exposing all other solutions that I'm giving for other companies as well. So data breach is happening for a company which is providing data breach against or data breach solutions to other companies. What kind of irony is that, right? So it is very important for you to know that what are the compliance structure that you have at a broader level for your organization, be it you're a legal services company or be it you're a IT services, oil and gas or telecommunication company per se. And then protect your most important data. Streamline your reporting process is a third point as a part of the GDPR compliant. And what are you doing in this process is you're notifying your authority that every time a data breach is happening, and I hope that is not via email, automated email, that is via something else that has a robust process around it. And then the second one is obtaining appropriate consents for processing personal data. And then the third one is maintaining a detailed record of processing activities. When I'm talking about the third point, you need to make sure about the other part of this particular activity. So of course you would need to store your records for years and years that should have a very detailed or granular label of processing activities data in it. But at the same time, you need to have a policy that will talk about record record destructions, or after how many years you're going to garbage your data, or what are the processes for record destructions per se, right? So you would have to take care of both the ends of data. And that being said, let's get started with article number 25. So we did talk about what is the definition, what are the contents in it in article 25, but we will be talking about in detail moving further. So SQL Server features that are compliant with this are authentication in SQL Server, Windows and mixed mode, and then Azure Active Directory authentication, the object label permissions. You can set up a role-based security. You can implement your good old firewall days, and then you can do dynamic data masking. But you would have to make sure that if you have your change data capture enabled or not before implementing dynamic data masking. I think Microsoft fixed it, not I think, it has fixed. So I am using the 17.3 SSMS, and I haven't fixed my new releases yet. But I had a change data capture enabled, and dynamic data masking wasn't successfully implemented. So you would have to be on latest version for that, but there are many articles that it has been fixed as well. Before I go ahead and talk about it, if you're in the SQL community, Redgate itself has a lot of content in terms of dynamic data masking and TDE and always encrypted. Feel free to check their resources out, and they're kind of relevant to what I'm talking today. And then SQL Authority blog post does have a lot of content in terms of all of these features. And so those are two great resources that helped me during this preparation. Right. So dynamic data masking, very simple function here. And as I said, the functions can be a default function if you want to implement it on any columns in your table. And you can use a function like email function to encrypt just the email IDs and things like that. So let me jump back to my query here. And I have tried this before. I'm just trying to be on the safer side, so I'm not going to execute the queries and things like that. And I have screenshots here. So if you have any questions during this presentation or it's creating confusion, please raise your hand or ask questions. I can take questions in the middle of it. But here is an example where I'm actually using regular functions of dynamic data masking. So I created a salesperson demo table. The two columns that I am trying to encrypt are parent employee key, and then I'm trying to encrypt the first name. So as you can see, the mask with function is default here. So again, I'm not going to run the query, but you'll see the output in the slides that you'll be referring after this session. So basically, you're trying to mask the two columns here, for this reason, I'm using a very basic database that I had from another reporting project of mine. However, if you're using masked with function is equal to email, that is basically targeting your email address. And I believe there are many other functions in dynamic data masking. And if you're following the Redgate resource as well as SQL Authority blog post, it talks in detail about what are the functions that we have in dynamic data masking and how many ways we can customize our data masking for each and every columns. But you would have to make sure that you're not logged in as your own user. You're creating whole another user without login access, where you're granting the access to the database, and this dynamic data masking would be implemented to that particular user. If you're a master user, you wouldn't see the right result. And so this is what my output for that particular query is. As you can see, the first name has been completely encrypted and my employee key is just encrypted to 0. I do have an actual employee key value. And this query did take a longer time, so I don't want to consume the time during my presentation here. This is another example where you're seeing your email addresses being completely encrypted, and that helps a lot when you're dealing with person-specific data or any master data per se. And just to give you a little bit of background about data types, it's I highly see data types as 4 categories, as Ralph Kimball did mention in his data warehouse books. So master data, transaction data, reference data, analytical data. And when I'm looking at this data as a business system analyst in terms of categorizing what kind of data I should be implementing encryption on, I always ask myself this particular question: that is it a master data? Is it a transaction data? So I have had a lot of reporting that is actually consuming a lot of transactional data. Is it a good candidate to implement dynamic data masking? No. Transactional data keeps on changing over day by day, and you wouldn't associate them with a higher PII value. That being said, reference data, analytical data basically are the third-party country codes, state codes, or your language code or currency codes per se. They are again not the best candidate to implement your dynamic data masking. So that's exactly why I would recommend that if you have master data, data which doesn't change a lot over the period of time, data which are really crucial to your company, you can absolutely implement dynamic data masking on them. However, if you have attributes such as tax rates, if you have attributes such as EBITDA, which are kind of like tax-related attributes, sounding like transactional data, but they are kind of crucial numbers to your company. And as an executive, you definitely don't want those numbers to be shown to other team members or anyone outside of your company per se. In that case, definitely those are the candidates to implement dynamic data masking on. So article number 32. What is the definition? Let me remind you a little bit. And this article is particularly where you're talking about encryption on a granular level. So you are trying to implement a process that is wanting to restore the data as well as test the security part of it. Row label security, transport layer security, and all other information that is mentioned here are all compliant with Article 32. In the meantime, I want to bring in Article 24 into discussion right now, because I am looking at this particular feature as from a BSA or business system analyst point of view. So Article number 24 talks about data classification and protecting data at an individual level. So when you're talking about data classification, going back to my previous example of master data, transactional data, reference data, analytical data, that is exactly when you are kind of looking at data on a very granular level, and you're kind of creating that guideline for your DBAs or developers to look at data, not from just data, I'm just going to take this data and put it in my EDW, and then I'm going to use it in reporting and other downstream system and stuff like that, but you're kind of like giving them a kind of like outline or the categorization that they shouldn't be treating each of these data in the same way. And so that being said, Article 24 can be like TDE feature or always encrypted feature can be Article 24 compliant as well. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring that up, because you're encrypting data on a granular level. So let's get into the demo of it. So transparent data encryption transparent data encryption can be done in 4 major steps. You would have to deal with your master database as well as your local database on and off. So the first 2 steps here, they have to deal with your master database, and then the bottom 2 steps are they have to deal with your user database. And give me 1 minute because I want to refer all of the information that I've been consuming on this. Yeah, so group by, if you go to groupby.org, you would find many demo on particularly on dynamic data masking as well as TDE. And the group by has really good demonstrations, and it talks about like each and every steps in detail as well. So I'm like giving you Redgate information, I'm giving you Sentry1 information, I'm giving you all other blog posts as well. So don't take me as a rivalry of any of the companies, but I'm just like a very knowledge savvy and any open source savvy person and a self-learner. So there you go. So the first one is create a database master key in the master database. How do you achieve that? We'll talk about that in detail. And then after create, let me talk about the steps here, and then we'll jump to the demo outline or the code outline part of it. You create a database master key first of all, and then you check that particular DMK in the respective table if that has been created or not in the view, actually system database provided view. And then you create your database encryption key. You check that if that DEK has been created or not, and then you create the actual DEK in the user database, and then you enable the final step of enabling transparent data encryption at the user database. So the actual work of enabling TDE is no biggie, but when you're talking about what are the dependencies associated with it, step number 1, 2, 3 has to be taken care of in a proper way. And if you want to enable another TDE, or if you want to create whole another DMK, you would have to drop all of it to create whole another one. So drop statements are very crucial when you're dealing with TDE on and off. So let's go to the demo here, the step 1. So step 1 is create a master key. This is how you create it, and the script will be shared in the demo slides as well. And then after creating a master key, you would have to verify that the key is created in the symmetric keys view, and the query for that is right here. And I do have screenshots for each and every one. So let me follow the slides rather than SSMS query here. Yeah, so as you can see here in the sys symmetric keys view, we do have 2 key names that has been created. So one is database master key and then service master key. That's because I was going on and off of creating the demo multiple times. So basically your fail-proof method is you're querying symmetric keys view just to see if your master key has been enabled or not. Going to the next one, create a certificate in the master database for securing your DK or database encryption key. And this command here right now, right here at the top corner, is talking about how do you create a TDE certificate. Create certificates, TDE cert with subject, whatever the name you want to give. And then issuer is TDE certificate, and then the certificate ID would be given to you. But I wanted to talk about various statuses of this particular process that can be confusing at times. So after you, I'll talk about that in the next slide. I believe I have a screenshot down below. And so in step 2, it's the same way that you created your DMK. You would have to query sys certificate to see if your certificate has been created or not. So you create it and you just select query from that particular table to know. And this is what I was talking about. There are various encryption states. So the values are shown here, 0 to 6. You would have to just query that particular table to see if your encrypt state is unencrypted, or which is 1, or encrypted, which is 3. But before that, how do you create a DEK itself? So the DEK database encryption key creation code will be given in the slide as well. And then as you can see, while I'm running the database encryption keys view, just to check if my database is in encrypted state or not, because I just created a DEK up top above, they are in unencrypted status. That's because I am creating this as a master user. I'll have to change my user credentials to validate that if my encrypt state and then I'll have to change my user status, and then I'll have to enable the TDE itself, which is step 4, just to see if my encrypt state is going from 1 to 3 or not, or unencrypted to encrypted or not. So that being said, right time to jump into enabling TDE on the user database. And you do it on the user database, you don't do it on the master database. And you alter your database where you had your DEK created. And then for that reason, you check if the query has been successfully executed or not. You check the database encryption keys. And as you can see, as after doing the alteration, the encrypt state has been moved from 1 to 3, unencrypted to encrypted. Now let's talk about what is always encrypted and how is it different from TDE per se. So at work, we're using SQL Server 2014, and my personal projects have been done in SQL Server 2017. So I just wanted to show you the screenshot of what is different in both of these two if you're new into SQL Server. Clicking on a database, right click, go to task. In that particular section for 2014, you don't see encrypt columns option. Whereas if you're going to 2017, you see that encrypt column option highlighted. And from there, it is basically click next, just to see your DB compatibility. And then you can implement column label encryption at a database level just when you're logging into your database, and we'll talk about that in detail as well. But basically, this process do not involve you to run multiple queries, create multiple keys, as you saw that in TDE demo, but you can do it with multiple clicks. But you would just have to make sure that you don't have a change data capture enabled, and you have column label encryption done at a database level when you're logging in. Other than that, if you're failing in the process, the error messages are pretty descriptive to tell you what's going wrong, why you were not able to implement column label always encryption in your tables. So I do have all the screenshots here, so I don't have to jump in here and there. I believe this screenshot is on a table that has CDC enabled, so I wanted to point the failure message out in the next slide. So performing encryption operations, you go from introduction to column selection. Column selection is where you're selecting which column you want to implement the encryption on, and then master key configuration, and then you're going to run the setting. That's exactly when the processing will happen. And then the summary of that, where did it fail, where did it pass, and the final result screen will talk about if it passed or failed. But as you can see in this particular slide, that my address entity table had change data capture enabled, and this deployment failed. So there are other caveats that I did not come across, but MSDN website has them called out separately. This was the only error message that I faced, so I wanted to call that out. And then you can always go to the always encrypted log report. Not so fancy, but you would get an idea about why it is failing, why it is passing, right? So you can enable always encryption at a connection label itself by writing column encryption setting is equal to enabled, and that would take away your master user credentials and still show you the result of the encryption. So a difference between dynamic data masking and always encryption is dynamic data masking has an on and off. Always encryption has an on and off tool. So basically you can turn it on, the encryption, as well turn it off on your side. But in case of TDE, you cannot like do that easily. Of course, you would have to drop the keys that you would have created. So it takes a little bit of developer work to get out of TDE. That's exactly why you should ask yourself multiple questions, that do I actually need TDE? Can I do the same level of encryption by using always encryption or dynamic data masking per se? And dynamic data masking comes in handy. You can just do it via the query right away, changing your user credentials from one user to another user. Always encryption does take a kind of like tool interaction, and you need to have the proper access to be able to implement it. Admin access to be able to implement it. So I wanted to give you an example of what happened to my city and state province code. So this is after the two columns that I selected when I ran the wizard here. And so in my column selection up here, right below introduction, I selected those two particular columns. And they do not look like PII, don't laugh at me, but kind of like thought that, what if I'm going to treat a non-PII data as a PII data? Is that going to make it look funnier or what? So kind of like picked random objects rather than picking SSN or employee ID and things like that. But the encrypted code itself is so huge, it merely looks at impossible to do the decrypting process, but you can decrypt it right at the database label by turning that equal to false, equal to disabled here column encryption setting. So data at rest versus data in transit. Always encrypted does allow you to implement data at rest, implement it upon data at rest as well as data in transit. So is your dynamic data masking. TDE does not. TDE is only for data at rest. And as you saw, the implementation TDE is quite a tedious task. So you would have to ask your proper level of people, resources in your project just to find out more explanatory use cases around particular columns that you're choosing it to be TDE enabled or not. Now, that being said, let's get into Compliance Manager and Compliance Center demo. I wanted to call out two things that I already have called out, but I saw two companies are really in the video that Microsoft has made for Compliance Manager, and it was back in, I believe, June of 2018, and they were talking about they're very hopeful about implementing Compliance Manager. Don't want to disclose their names. But they are security related firms. And so when you're talking about compliance manager, you would have to make sure that you are looking this tool as a business user, as a person who's up above a program manager or a kind of director or anything which is around that area, versus if you're talking about compliance center and security, your role should be as a business system analyst or as a developer or GBA per se, and anything that involves technical work, kind of like coding and other kind of technical work. And there are technical work at the executive level as well, so those do not belong to compliance center or security center. So prior to last year, they used to call Security Center as one tool, Compliance Center as another tool. But the version of the tool that I'm using is actually combined the two features. I have not added the screenshot of particularly Security and Compliance Center left pane, where depending upon the type of Microsoft Office 365 account that you have, it would limit the features that Compliance Center, Security and Compliance Center has. So there are 12 sections around right now in the left pane. And so depending upon your E3 or E5 subscription of Office 365, it limits certain sections. So you would have to fix that before you get into the tool itself. Now let's talk about Compliance Manager and what does it do actually. So there are, give me 1 minute here. There are multiple sections in Compliance Manager, and I haven't captured that in particular the screenshot, but we'll get to the demo of it. It comes with your Office 365 subscription. You do not have to purchase it. But as you can see here, the first section that you have is Office 365 GDPR. The second one is Office 365 NIST 800-53. And what is your score? You're scoring 264 out of 626. So again, this can be done via yourself or any third party that security company that or auditing company that your company has relationship with, and it does take a really good amount of documentation. And that being said, let's get to the demo of it. While it is logging in, let's talk about it a little bit further. It logged out during the time. And so I just wanted to call out what are the in-scope cloud services. And please note that this is only taking care of your cloud accounts. It doesn't talk about anything that is sitting on your local folders. So basically, if you're a company which is dealing with a lot of shared folder related work, and you're trying to implement a business rules on them in terms of archiving them or purging them, and trying to notify your business users for any kind of shared folder activities that is done, or providing proper access to those shared folder even. And those are not taken care of in Compliance Manager itself. So those are all your on-prem kind of work, and they don't talk about anything that is associated here. But that being said, let's talk about the tools that your team might be using, and you can implement certain business rules on them. And please make sure you're actually not doing anything other than creating documentation and getting a score in terms of passing the GDPR exam in Compliance Manager. When you're trying to implement a little bit technical level work, you would have to go to protection.office.com, which is the second part of this slide. So Compliance Manager is integrated with solutions such as Azure Information Protection, Office 365 Advanced Data Governance, and then Windows Defender ATP. I have highlighted Microsoft Teams here. And then there are other features that you have. So it basically can link your Outlook email addresses. So say, for example, I have a lot of email conversation about a particular client that we are dealing with, and I have created a tag on that particular client. They can be classified as PII data, and they can be there can be certain business rules in terms of exposing those PII data in even Outlook. So whenever you're receiving that email highlights you the privacy protection that the email comes with, and that all can be done at your Compliance Manager. And you implement those labels, they call it labels, and you create that in Compliance Center. And so kind of like linking between Compliance Manager and Compliance Center is all we are doing. And we're kind of categorizing all of our communications or chat conversation that is happening in Teams and putting them into various buckets and taking right actions on them. This is my web page up here yet. Let me see real quick. Okay, perfect. So I don't have a lot to display here, but I'll have to say that if you're clicking on this particular guy here and going to the action item, it what can you do with that? You would define your role here. What is my action title? Let's say I'm going to validate all the email conversation that is associating one of my particular client, which is very on a priority based client. And then you add yourself as the owner, and then you test and implement the results, and then you publish it out, and then Microsoft would assign you a particular score based upon the tool features that they have here. And so that's all to it. And you get a score, and you can show that to companies which are doing your evaluation about your privacy or auditing or risk auditing per se. Now let's talk about what is Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. You get a lot of features here. So one of the features that I wanted to specifically call out is implementing labels in data governance section. So you'd have to go to classifications. You would have to go to create a label. These are a couple of my clients that I was just creating a demo on. You go to create a label, and then you assign a encryption to them, and then you add all the AD list, all the email distribution list that you have, who has access to read about data that involves PII data. So anytime your email, you would be sending those kind of keywords that you're creating here and trying to send an email to another person who's not added in this list, in the sensitivity label list, they won't be receiving your email at all. So that is kind of like safeguarding yourself if you're a new employee and trying to have a PII conversation with employee B or employee C, who shouldn't be getting that information that you're trying to share. The system would, of course, prohibit them beforehand itself. So that's a good safeguard method. And you would have to publish it. And after publishing, it would just create an email notification to each and everyone who's associated in the AD list, and you can take it from there. But I wanted to talk about another feature that comes with this classification. You can take it one step further by going to the data governance section, where I am actually adding my labels that I have created. And by adding the labels wherein I can set up really import, archive, retention, or purging rules. And so it would tell me how many of us are actually talking about the PII associated data, how many of us are talking about really crucial data, and how many of those email notifications have failed, how many of such employee have tried to implement or participate in a data breach action. Because basically what you're doing, if you're trying to send those information to a person where it shouldn't be intended to, then that means you're a victim, or that person is a not that person, you yourself just committed a crime in terms of sharing PII data with another person. And so these labels can be used in the supervision section as well, where it would highlight each and every trend in terms of the labels that are misused and create a safeguard around them. And then you can add in the mail flow section, you can add your the control flow of at what phase, if my data is not being transmitted from person A to person B, or what can I do with that data. The email, the failure email notification can just go to archiving folder. The failure email or the actual successful email notification can have to go to purging one because data has already been shared. And so remember, this is designed specifically for your cloud-based applications. So the old way of going about setting your shared folder or network drives or PowerShell scripts that comes with it, they are not participating in this particular process. And I'm coming from master data services world. I remember creating a lot of AD user groups in MDS UI based application, and then and then certain times it's not following the rules, or certain times if you're adding it at an employee label rather than adding the AD label first, the business rules do not trigger. So those kind of things would still be relevant to the AD group creation in your protection, in your compliance office, compliance center as well. So that's all there to it. And you can explore each and every section. We still are in the process of talking about it. We've started the talk, so that's a good thing. But implementation part of it is a far cry. So that being said, I believe I have finished my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, it has been very informative. We do have a few questions. One of them is, I think, was when you were in the middle of your session, when you were talking about the issuing using key and passwords and creating certificates, and the question came from Sri. If we lose these key passwords, what are the options? I believe, what are the options? Either can we restore our access to see the data, or can we have another way to decrypt the data that has been encrypted?
Yeah, you actually can drop the DK
Yes.
right away. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So you would have to drop it all over again. So
Yes, I can.
You would have to drop it and then create it all over again to assign a correct password to those. That's one way of going about it.
Oh, I see. The next question was, what's the difference? Mhm. What's the difference between user database and master database? I think it would still within the same use case when you were showing your T-SQL demo.
Yeah. So I've
Can
actually
we, I guess, believe to like apply similar?
So when you install your SQL Server, your master database would be created. It comes with the installation itself, and it creates all the system-based views, system-based tables in it, and you don't have to create it. But when
Mhm.
you're creating your user database, it is particularly to your projects that you're working on, and that's where the master and user database difference is coming in. I believe that was a question
Oh,
from a
okay.
person who hasn't
And maybe
used
just look
SQL
at it.
Server a lot.
Talk about the encryption. Like, can you just maybe give us a brief like overview about the difference? What the static data masking and then dynamic data masking? Are there any um, key benefits of using one of them, or what should be the best way for us to use the data masking within the database environment?
So dynamic data masking came into picture in SQL Server 2017. Prior to that, you didn't have a way of implementing that on a column label and things like that. You would have to create a stored block and then have to implement the static masking rules and criterias that my team is currently going after. But dynamic data masking is just fairly simple, as you saw. It's just 2 lines of query. Plus, it has a really huge number of functions that you have. So your coding lines would just decrease. Like you wouldn't have to create a lot of views and a lot of calling functions in or the custom
Mm-hmm.
function in your stored block.
Mm-hmm.
You can utilize the functions that dynamic data masking itself provides, masking with, and then utilize all of the other functions. And you can explore the various functions in the MSDN website.
Okay, okay. Maybe just the biggest follow-up question came from Tree as well. And how will the restore work with the column encryption is enabled? If the user access the restore environment, will it be enabled too? Like if, I guess, basically, if we, can we lift and shift that database environments with all those encrypted features and then deploy or restore in another environments
So
with
it
an
got it. So I think that was my original question when I got started with this too. But not that I have to do a lift and shift. But you would have to make sure what is the user access that you have.
Mhm.
So are you accessing as an admin or are you accessing as your local user when you're moving from one SQL Server to another one? But I believe the feature stays the same if you're an admin. But you would have, if not, it is just a matter of dropping the keys and creating all over again for each and every database. But I haven't done that
Okay.
personally, I would be honest.
Oh, interesting. And the next question goes to to your second part of the session when where you were talking about the data compliance within the Office 365 environment. Let's say I have this report. I can see the number of like the documents that are compliant to certain rules and the number of documents that are not compliant. Will it also give me the list of those files with the each individual, like the issues that where my files are not compliant? Is that possible?
Absolutely, and that is exactly when your scoring is coming into picture. So when you publish those, the tool itself runs the compliance quality on each and every document and the sections of the document that you have provided. It is simply like your BRD, business requirement documentation, or a functional requirement documentation. So compliance manager would read out and do the text analysis on each and every section of it, and then you can add screenshots there. You can add your screenshots of the Outlook business rules and whatnot. And the results section, when you have hit the publish or the submit section, it will talk about the errors and where did you lose the points. It's basically like your exam score evaluation, why you got these many points and where you failed.
Okay, got it. Maybe the very last question, then we'll be wrapping up this session. Going back to the data masking. Maybe just to give another maybe brief review. So whatever we define as a mask, that remains within the schema of our database, and then if we move the database to another location, that the mask will remain. Is that the fair statement, or maybe there's some more clarification that we may need for the like how to make sure that the mask will remain within our database, data mask will remain within our database environment.
That's a fair statement. Yes, it would remain itself, but it goes back to the particular code line that I added here, which is like execute as user one. So it depends upon if you have changed your user label any time after moving from one table to other. So it's not a code logic
Hmm.
that wouldn't stay. The code logic would stay as you have created here in this right-hand pane here, but it's about what is your user, in what way you have logged into SSMS. So that's it. Answer is
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
but you have to be careful.
Great. Thanks. Thanks. That was the last question. I want to thank you for your time to and efforts to deliver the sessions. It has been really helpful, informative for. I believe it was really informative and helpful for me personally, and I believe it was the same experience for all the participants. I would just to close the session, I would like to remind for all the participants of the session that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session. So please wait for the pop-up, and then your feedback is very important. And please take a moment to complete this evaluation form. Thank you again for attending the sessions, and yeah, please check for all other events from the past community, and let's keep learning and practice more database techniques that we can do. Thanks again, Justin. Thank you everyone who were able to join the session.
Yeah, thank you so much.